What did you say? What did you say to me? Disrespecting me again! Again!
No! Leave me alone!
Keep moving, Big Ted! Keep moving!
What are you doing?
Bitches!
Are you crazy?
Bitches all over the world! You're gonna get some of it now!
On the cops! Shit! Shoot this! You can't just beat up on her!
Fuck you!
Let her go!
I ain't doing
Do you
nothing to her. She
think
hurt me!
people are just gonna stand
She hurt me!
around watching you hurt her?
Oh,
No, okay.
Disrespect!
Alright, that's it. Hello? Hello? Yes. Yes, a man is beating up this woman at Octavia and... Leave me alone.
This is a true story. So, I took a seat on the subway platform on one of the benches at Civic Center. And this street person, this man about 30, has his back to me on the other side of the bench. And you know, I don't bother anybody, I don't talk to anybody unless they start talking to me, unless it's on the bus. But this is a subway. So he says, "Who is that?" And you know that big pink mohair hoodie? That, you know, oh yeah, that's right, you gave that to me. I didn't turn around. I didn't say anything. I mind my own business. Well, I can hear him getting up and walking around to my side of the bench. And, honey, he was standing way too close for comfort. And I see this thumbnail coming up under the hoodie, because I had it on, and I see, and he's trying to lift the hoodie, and of course I yelled at him, "Don't start bothering me, leave me alone." And honey, do you know what he says? He says, "Well, you should know better than to sit behind a person who was incarcerated, where if you turn your back on somebody, you might get killed." And I was kind of like that. I didn't even know what to say for about a minute. So then I said, "But that doesn't have anything to do with me." And then, of course, I had to be a social worker. "You're responsible for your own thoughts." And he says, "Yes, it does have to do with you. It's all of you." And he's like looking around, you know, in this grandiose gesture, like he's pointing at everybody else on the subway platform. And he says, "All of you. It's your fault I was incarcerated." And I had to be the social worker again. That's right. Everybody else is supposed to take care of you like a big damn baby. Well, maybe that part wasn't quite like a social worker, unless I knew the client really well and I knew they would know what I meant by that. And he says, "No, they don't. I take care of myself. It's not my fault that I'm an addict and I was incarcerated. No, don't look at me like that, Sonia. I am not making this one up. I am not exaggerating. This happened, okay?" And so then I say, well, it's not my fault either. I'm not responsible for the difficulties in your life. And he says, yes, you are. You vote. And once again, I'm speechless for a minute. And then I said, yeah, but I'm not responsible for that. I didn't vote for that. And so he says, well, I'm sorry if I made some assumption. Are people crazy?
So where do I start? I guess I should start at the beginning. The beginning of my mother and I not being able to abide each other. She's been driving me crazy since I was 10, but when I was 14, I got pregnant by this college boy who was 21, I think, and I got pregnant, and my mother had a job, and at the time, my Aunt Alicia also had a job. She eventually, something happened to her back or something, and she had to stop working and be on disability, and she lived with us. But this was before that, so I'm this 14-year-old, and I'm having all these problems with my pregnancy. I mean, it was like really bad, like, you know, I don't know how many ambulance trips I had to take to the hospital while I was pregnant. So anyway, my boyfriend's parents wanted the baby. They wanted to adopt the baby, which that still is kind of creepy. I still don't understand that. But anyway, so she wasn't really my mother-in-law, but my boyfriend's mother was a housewife. And she was able to take care of me. And I mean, I have to say, because there was somebody there to take care of me during the day, it did make the pregnancy easier, and there were fewer trips to the hospital. So I'm living with them, and I notice after I've been living with them for about 6 weeks that sometimes there'd be these noises, like loud noises and yelling from some part of the house. And the next day, my boyfriend's mother, not my mother-in-law, would have bruises. And, you know, and like the last time I remember it happening before the really horrible thing happened, she even had a black eye. And nobody would tell me what was going on. But a little while after that, a little while after the black eye, and I probably at this point, I'm about, I don't know, maybe 6 months pregnant. I don't think I was that big though, maybe only 5. My boyfriend got mad at me for something. I don't know. All I remember is I thought he was mad. He was yelling at me and going off at me because I disagree with him about something. I mean, I'm 14, you know. And he hit me. And I got upset. This happened in our room. And I got upset and I started to leave the room, and he grabbed me. No, I'm not done yet, he says. And I'm thinking, yes, you are done. You are done. I'm going downstairs. I'm going to get a glass of milk, watch TV, order pizza, something. And he keeps trying to pull me back, but I got further and further and further away from him. And the next thing you know, we're right on the landing in front of the staircase, and he's pushing and pulling and pushing and pulling, and all of a sudden he's at the bottom of the staircase with a broken neck, dead, just like that. Well, for some reason, his mother took my side. I think she wanted that baby so bad that she didn't want to do anything to alienate me. I mean, it was horrible. I mean, I'm not a sociopath. I wasn't happy about what happened, and I did love that boy, you know. I was going to a lot of trouble to do this for his parents, right? And so, you know, police come, you know, and they question me, and they're holding me for a while, and Sondra, my mother's freaking out, and even my Aunt Alicia seemed at a loss for what to say. There was no smart mouth Aunt Alicia during this time, but my mother-in-law, who actually had a black eye from my father-in-law at the time, took my side. And I don't know. I mean, maybe she's surrounded by these violent men, and here's this thing, this baby that's gonna be hers in a few months. And I don't know, maybe it just gave her some kind of weird hope or something. But he fell down the stairs in a tussle with me. So even though I was completely cleared of being at fault for his death, I know what happened. I was part of that situation. He's dead because of himself, but he's also dead because of me. My mother has never understood how I can look at it that way. This is another true story. You know how I just have this thing about people who think they deserve more of whatever than everybody else. You see this stuff all the time on the bus, all the time, all the time. So I'm on the bus, and this very old woman, you know, I mean, she might not have been that much older than me, but she wasn't in really good shape. She had a really bad widow's home. She's on a walker. She gets on the bus. Well, as far as I'm concerned, somebody in that kind of shape who's going out on her own to do what she needs to do You shouldn't just give them a seat. They should get a prize. So I get up, and this very nice young man gets up. We get out of our seats to make room for her. One of the seats is occupied by this tall, big boned woman who looks mid to late 20s, maybe not even that old, but she is definitely one of these angry young people who sit in the senior seats just so they can complain and get into a fight if an old lady needs their seat. We've all seen that if we've been on the bus. I know you've seen that. So 6 blocks later, the old woman on the walker begins the long process of rising on her walker so she can get off at the next stop, which, they changed Van Ness, so that's 4 blocks away now. Plenty of time, even for her in her condition. So the young man and I once again try to make more room for her. We get to the stop, and he and I get off the bus to clear the aisle for her, and she starts slowly descending from the bus. So while I'm watching her, waiting until I can get back on the bus, and I'm admiring how independent she clearly is trying to be, I realize that this angry young woman, this bitch, is right behind the woman on the walker, impatient, huffing and puffing and almost bumping into her like she's trying to push her. And I realize that this young woman, I'm hardly believing what I'm hearing and what I'm seeing with all that huffing and puffing. And even though she looks completely healthy and doesn't have a limp or anything, not bent over, not looking like she's hurting or suffering, is on a cane. And I figure she's a faker, and it just makes me so mad I can't help saying, you'll be old one day too. And her eyes get real big, and she's like, but I'm already 34. And the young man, he must not be around grouchy old people very much. He looks surprised and confused, and as he and I get back on the bus driver looks at us and in this kind of stage whisper says to us, "Thank you." And I'm like smiling back at him, and I feel all these eyes on me. And I turned around and I realized that most of the old people in the senior seats were snickering and giggling. And one of them, maybe 5 years younger than me, asked me if I wanted to sit. Yeah, she's younger than me, but I bet she doesn't jog for 20 minutes every day and do all the stuff I do. And also, she's not wearing cowboy boots, which people just don't know are the best old lady shoes. And I was sure she wasn't on her way to the store like I was to get a bottle of tequila. And I am like barely able to keep from laughing myself at that point. And I said, "No, thank you, honey. I'm fine." There's no other way to say it. My mother died last week. It's no secret that we didn't get along. It's no secret that I never felt like she accepted me as not being her. Right. And since I never knew my father, I have no idea who he was. And so, of course, I know nothing about his propensities or propensities that run in his family. Then I can only assume that my mother couldn't accept that I was not her twin, that I was not her clone, and that I inherited the makeup that I inherited. When people that you have such mixed, extremely mixed feelings about die suddenly like that, it's like everything that needed to get said that could never be said will absolutely never, ever, ever be said now, because they're gone and you can't even have that discussion, even if the discussion is even possible, which it probably wasn't in the first place. But as long as she was alive, I at least had the option that maybe we would be able to talk about that shit. And I'm the one that bounces back from everything. So just give me a little benefit of the doubt. I need to have this talk because I'm worried about my Aunt Alicia, who has barely even said a word. Not a word. If you can imagine my Aunt Alicia, who can't ever stop talking, has barely said a word since my mother died. Who knew that it was even inside her to, for the first few days after my mother died, believe that she had committed suicide? No, she didn't. She's 66 years old and she died in her sleep. I'm kind of mad at my mother because I feel like she got away with never resolving stuff that it really was on her to resolve. For never explaining to me those 5 years, it was about 5 years, that she would come flying up the stairs to my room, waving a belt around, yelling and screaming out of her mind and completely out of control and out of character, because she was nothing if not the picture of control. She was too controlled. And a few times I tried to ask her about it as I got older, and she was always, well, that's in the past. And then finally, I felt like I was pretty grown because I was like 27 or 28. And I brought it up again after not having brought it up for about, I don't know, maybe 10 years. Like since around the time that I started college. And she said exactly the same thing she had said when I was younger. That's in the past. And I'm sorry. And she even said, if that hurt you. She didn't even say that hurt you that time. She said, I'm sorry if it hurt you, but that's in the past. And she added, I was having a weak moment. And she's pretty much slapped me down passive aggressively by saying that's in the past and we're not going to talk about it. And so I said, you're in a weak moment for 5 years? And she just said, yes. So yeah, I'm kind of mad that never got answered. I even asked my Aunt Alicia about it once, and she never saw it happen. She never saw it happen. I had never brought it up. Maybe one or two friends in college, and then I wanted to put it out of my mind because I get over stuff. But for some reason, that keeps coming back. And it came back super big last week when she suddenly dies in her sleep. And I'm trying to deal with the fact that all of a sudden she's not there. And it's obvious that my Aunt Alicia isn't herself. And I realize I'm going to have to deal with the fact that my mother's gone. I'm going to have to deal with the fact of all the unresolved stuff that I can't bring up when I turn 50 or 55 or 60 and maybe she would finally have talked to me about it. I've got to deal with all of that and handle all the death stuff. Life is unfair, and so is death. Today, I'm on the Hayes bus, and I don't say a word when the bus driver and this man who apparently rides the buses a lot and is kind of like my Aunt Alicia. He knows all the bus driver, and he was particularly friendly with this bus driver. When all of a sudden, there's a dozen Chinese tourists with a big honking baby carriage with them, asking, is this the bus you take to go to Alamo Square? And of course it is. It's the Hayes bus. And Alamo Square is up the hill from our house on Hayes. And you get there on the Hayes bus. And so what does the bus driver and this old man, this Uncle Alicia, what do they tell these people? Bald-faced lie with perfectly straight faces. Oh no, you take the number 5 for that. The number 5 runs along Fulton, which is 3 blocks over. And if you want to get to Alamo Square from Fulton Street, you have to go up a hill. And I couldn't believe, I thought they were kidding when they told these people that. And I mean, that kind of caught me off guard. By the time I realized they weren't kidding, we were pulling away, but I was so upset. I mean, I started out, I was mad at them for telling this lie, for being so mean, and telling them to take the wrong goddamn bus. And there's no way both the driver and this overly friendly passenger There's no way between the two of them they didn't know exactly what they were doing. But what does Miss Sonia do? She just sits there. I just sat there fuming. And you know, Christmas season, the holiday season, is so full of triggers and reminders of everything that ever happened during the holiday season. Next year on December 27th at 3 in the afternoon, I'm going to remember that this happened, and I'm probably going to get at least as mad at myself again in a year, at least as mad at myself as I am right now. I do have quite a bit on my mind because of Aunt Alicia. Speaking of Aunt Alicia, she's not talking. And that's not normal. I guess grief shuts Aunt Alicia up because she's been this way since my mother died in her sleep. It's just that it just seems like it's taking Aunt Alicia longer to adjust to an unpleasant situation than it usually takes her to adjust. She is still going out. I don't know if she's riding the bus though, because that's part of her social life, of course. I wish I knew what to do. I did get her a camera. I got it early because she likes to she shoots these little documentaries around it always starts around Halloween, where she just shoots people on the street, or she shoots things that she sees on the street that most likely wouldn't be there, or things wouldn't be happening, or a person wouldn't be dressed that way, even in San Francisco, unless it was Halloween or Thanksgiving or the Christmas holidays. She's not relating directly to people. And that's what I'm concerned about. And it wouldn't bother me so much, except that she's shooting weird graffiti. It's like she's seeing things that she would normally see. Like weird graffiti. She doesn't pay any attention to things like that. If she says anything about things like that, she sounds like a social worker. Like she's analyzing, why did that person write that? Where is their head at? What's their situation right now? When I imagine her out going down the street, I imagine her like a ghost or a shadow who's not connecting to what she's seeing and what she's hearing. I just hope she's connecting to what she's feeling. I hope she's processing. I mean, people like that, people like Aunt Alicia, it's like a bad thing happens. And she sees what happened. She accepts it. And then she makes a joke. And then she says, well, this is what you need to do. There's always a joke. And I'm not saying that I think that she should make a joke about my mother. It's just that I'm kind of surprised that she hasn't. Not that she should, but that she would. The good news is the people in my mother's family don't hug. That's really good news for me, though I'm not sure how much good it's doing me now. I'm such a hermit. I should have been happy when shelter in place went into effect, especially, and I apologize to the sensitive, especially since I wouldn't have been in the house with my mother because she died in her sleep around the beginning of the year. Now I'm in the house with my Aunt Alicia, which would have been okay, except that my Aunt Alicia is having a really difficult time. Because my Aunt Alicia is a person who is a real blabbermouth, never shuts up, is the kind of person on the bus that makes you wish you had those earphones that shut out noise. But when my mother died, Aunt Alicia stopped talking. And they're 70. Yes, this year. And we're supposed to worry about our seniors and this virus. But she's not talking. And I don't know how she is. I mean, she's just flat. I mean, she doesn't even cry. Not even in her sleep. I have no idea what's going on with her. And so I was really worried about whether I was going to be able to monitor her. I mean, I have been cooking, believe it or not. I'm making breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And of course, I've only been back living in this house since a few months before my mother died, and I am a bachelor and I eat out of cans. Well, maybe not quite that bad. You can't heat up a can in the microwave. I just felt so bad for Aunt Alicia, and so I tried to fill in the gap because my mother fed her and took care of her and watched out for her and handled her money, everything. And Aunt Alicia, until shelter in place, would not even come downstairs to eat with me. I would call her, say the meal is ready, and she wouldn't even come downstairs until I was finished and had left the room. And she's been eating a lot of cold food. The first time I tried to keep it warm for her, she seemed really irritated, and so I just let it be, just let it stay on the table. I was worried that all of a sudden she shut down, that she would just stay in her room and fade away like people do. You know, like these people who've been married forever and one spouse dies and then a few days later, weeks later, months later, the other spouse dies. Because my mother and my Aunt Alicia have been living together for about 25 years in this house, my mother's house. And they were very different people. Very. And apparently there were much longer periods of time that they weren't speaking to each other than I was not speaking to my mother. And one of those apparently involved a husband, the only husband they've ever had between them. That was Aunt Alicia's husband. She never talks about him, and when I tried to find out what that story was from my mother, of course she didn't tell me, because I wanted to know. That's just the way she was. Once the shelter-in-place order went into effect, I'd barely been alone in the house, unless Aunt Alicia, she's still riding the bus. Oh God, she's still riding the bus. She's 70 years old and she's still riding the bus. It's a social event for her. She moved a cot into my room. We're eating together. We're doing everything together. In fact, she is somewhere in the house today, and this is the longest period of time that I have been by myself since shelter in place, and that includes the bathroom, and I am not talking about taking a bath or a shower. I mean, we're both girls and we're related, but really, Aunt Alicia, really? But the worst thing is, she is one of these people who doesn't want to wear a mask. Well, as far as I'm concerned, once she comes back from doing her social bit, riding the bus, I think she should put a mask on when she comes into the house. And of course, she's still not talking. So we're talking about passive resistance when I try to get her to put on a mask. She's like Tarzan inside, you know, all ah-ya and strong. But even though I take care of myself almost as well as she does, and certainly a lot better than my mother, I inherited my mother's constitution. I catch everything just like my mother did. There's 8 different strands of COVID-19 and she won't wear a mask. And for all I know, she might have brought it home 5,000 times. I mean, there might be viruses all over this house just waiting to come and get me. I don't know why this is so difficult to talk about. I'm certainly not homophobic. So I lived with the dead boyfriend's family. I was about 3 or 4, I was in between 3 and 4 months pregnant. And I almost miscarried, and it was very difficult. So that was about the point that my mother and his mother decided I should live with them. I guess I lived with them for about 3 months before he died. When I was in college the first time, well, I wasn't really living with this guy. I was spending half the nights of the week with him. So let's say I was living. Okay, so that's 6 weeks. So that's 4.5 months. And then when I went for graduate school, I lived in a house where I shared a room for almost a year, let's say 10 months, with this boy who wasn't really a boyfriend. We were friends who liked to have sex with each other. So that's 10 months, so that's 14 and a half months. And much to my mother's shame and disbelief, I get my master's degree and immediately go to bartender school. And it was fun. I'm not a person who has fun. I'm just not, I'm not sour-natured like my mother was. I'm not. But I don't have fun. I don't really need fun. I don't need that much diversion. I live in the world. I watch the world happening around me, and that's enough entertainment for me. However, when I first started being a bartender, it was fun, and I had an affair with my first boss. And I wasn't living with him. He was spending most of the nights of the week at my place. And that lasted for 2 months. And then his wife came home. It wouldn't have lasted much beyond that anyway. He was a nice guy, very good looking, but he just wasn't smart enough for me. You know, you don't have to talk smart, you don't have to show off, you don't have to act smart, display your knowledge or anything, but if you're sitting in a chair in a room with me and you're supposed to be my boyfriend, I have to know that you're not stupid. And he was stupid. So that was 2 months plus 10 months plus 4.5 months. Do I have the math wrong? The math is probably wrong, but it was about 14 or 15 months in total. In total. That I've ever lived with anyone. spite of how conservative she wasn't at all religious. So it's not like she thought it was a sin to be gay. It was just too weird and off the straight and narrow path. I think my mother would have been the type of person to passively discourage a gay person in her office, male or female, by, for example, not giving them the biggest accounts to work on, or opportunities like going to conferences or taking classes. I think she would have been that kind of passively discriminatory employer. But she didn't act outwardly hateful about it, because outwardly hateful people are not perfect, and she, of course, was perfect. So it was probably after the bartender that my mother confronts me with my lesbianism, which of course is non-existent. I think I probably am asexual. I don't dislike it. I've enjoyed it when I've done it, but I just don't need it. If you widen the straight path, and I don't mean straight like heterosexual, I mean just a straight path where you're not getting into trouble all the time. If you widen that, it should be inclusive of a lot of different types of people, because not everybody who's not on that straight and narrow path is crazy. And it was this 3-year campaign. This went on and on and on, where she would try to find ways to get me to come out of the closet to her. My mother was no laughing matter. I mean, she was really pretty horrible. But this was funny because it was so ridiculous and out of character for her to be so obsessive about my being homosexual. My Aunt Alicia was the first person who ever mentioned asexuality to me, because that's how she sees herself. I'm sure that she doesn't completely abstain. I'm sure she would be completely comfortable if the opportunity arose. Whereas I, on the other hand, avoid being in situations where the opportunity would arise. And it's not. And yes, it's true. Aunt Alicia and I got a lot of good laughs about some of the ways that my mother came up with to get me to open up. And then it wasn't funny. It wasn't funny. And that is about the time that my mother and I, it became impossible for us to communicate.
A black woman who might have been in her 30s, but who probably was still in her 20s. A lot of disheveled hair, pretty brown skin, no makeup, plump figure, but not fat. She was barely dressed, wearing some sort of hot pants outfit, a jumpsuit that looked sort of jerry-rigged, like tied or safety pinned at one shoulder. The first thing I thought when I saw that woman is that woman's been raped. The bus driver came to the 6 and Jones stop on Market Street, and there was a Muni supervisor waiting at the bus stop. He jumped in front of the woman, and it was clear he was trying to keep her from getting on the bus. He and some men who were farther back, closer to the buildings on the street, were loitering like men do at bus stops. They all start laughing, and the men on the sidewalk start yelling at the bus driver, "Don't let her on the bus. Don't let her on the bus." And people who were on the bus were saying things like, "She's drunk, she must be on crack." But honey, all I saw was she looked upset and distressed. She was not carrying a purse or anything, and she looked like she was in shock. Like people look after something terrible happens. But you know what? Even if she had been drunk or was on crack, she was acting like she really needed to get on the bus. And she was so distressed that she started yelling at some cops who were on the other side of the street to help her. The cops were putting caution tape around the doorway, the entry to some building, like they were anticipating queues forming for some event or something. And the cops were hostile toward her. And their posture, their whole manner was threatening towards her. And then somebody on the bus said, "Uh-oh, now she's going to get arrested." And somebody else said, "Well, maybe that's what she really wants, is to get arrested." I'm sorry. I hate to sound like a social worker again, but that woman's skin was too good. And her hair, it was all her hair, was too thick and too healthy for her body and brain to be that fried on crack or anything else. Streetwalkers cannot look like she did without tons and tons of makeup and lots of preparation. That's why they're mostly out at night. She probably was in trouble. But she couldn't have been in trouble for like maybe more than a few minutes. Something happened. She was truly distressed. I couldn't believe that practically everybody on the bus, except me and a couple of other people, were laughing as if this was some raunchy reality TV for their entertainment. I had to get off the bus. I walked home. I was so disgusted. I could not be on the bus with those people.
That was her spot. Aunt Alicia is starting to talk a little bit again. And she says we should keep my mother's chair there. We should keep her spot the way it always was. I think for her, it's a spiritual thing, as if something is left of my mother in that chair. To me, it's just a chair. She bought this house when I was 3rd grade, 8, I think. And for the first year that we lived here, there wasn't a chair there. And that was not her spot. She used to pace all the time. She hardly ever sat down. Sometimes she would even pace during dinner. And she would get really upset if we said anything to her about it, because, you know, it can drive you kind of crazy when a person is going back and forth, back and forth. They're upstairs, and it's an old house. It creaks. It really creaks. I mean, sometimes it's really spooky, and it's so old that the wind can make it creak in the middle of the night. And we would just want her to sit down, chill. I mean, nobody said chill in 3rd grade. Nobody I knew anyway. But she would just back and forth, up and down the stairs, up into the attic. Sometimes it sounded like she was walking in circles around the attic. And then she would come back down to the 1st floor, and she would pace the whole length of the house, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, until I guess finally she was too tired, and she would usually at that point go to bed. After doing this all day after work, on Saturdays it was all day, on Sundays it was all day. And then she had a tree planted right outside this window, and of course it was really small, and you couldn't see the tree like you can see now. And after the tree was planted, then she would be in her spot most of the time when she was home. And we weren't eating, or she wasn't cleaning house, or she wasn't doing some relative's taxes. She was in her spot, watching that tree. Like the tree needed a guardian angel, or it's something. My mother was hardly an angel, and some of you who know me well are probably having uncharitable thoughts about her, which are justified, because she was as mean to anybody who was my friend as she was to me and Aunt Alicia. Well, the one thing I'll say is I'm not sentimental, but I'm also open-minded, and even though I inherited the house, it's still Aunt Alicia's house as far as I'm concerned. She might have even spent more years here, living here, than I did, because I left as soon as I could. And I talk about my mother the way that she was all the time. And the truth about her is really sort of awful sometimes, as you know. But I don't mean to be mean by saying what I'm about to say. The one positive thing I will say about that chair is that it is a reminder that my mother is not pacing the house 24/7 anymore. My mother is not haunting me anymore. It's true. When I ordered cable for the house after I moved in, I watch a lot of movies. We agreed that we would not patronize certain entertainers, directors, producers who were on the Me Too list. It's this list that Time or Newsweek started in, I think it was in 2017, November 2017. I think the first name on it is Weinstein. And there's like over 100 names of people whose careers were adversely affected. We agreed that we would not patronize any of those people. So last night, The Usual Suspects was being broadcast. No commercials, of course. And I was watching it in my room with the door closed, and I even had headphones on so Aunt Alicia couldn't hear it. And the reason why I didn't want her to hear it is because Kevin Spacey's in it, and Kevin Spacey is on the list. And apparently everybody in the family, including my grandparents and great aunts and great grandparents, thought that Aunt Alicia was a little hoodoo from the moment she was born, you know, kind of psychic. She burst into my room, and I thought she was actually going to break my television set. She did pull the cable out, and she pulled it out so violently that I don't know if it's even going to work now. She comes in there and she's saying, "He's a pedophile! He's a pedophile! We agreed! And she's yelling and screaming and practically like bouncing off the walls like a whirling dervish or a demon or something. And, you know, I'm like this at first, and I'm like trying to talk to her in my social worker voice, and it's not working. She's just getting madder and madder and madder. And so finally I just started screaming, "Shut up! Alicia, shut up! Shut the fuck up!" And that didn't work either. And finally she ran out of my room and slammed the door, cracked it. I mean, you could actually hear the wood cracking when she slammed my door. And so I just sat there. I sat there without moving, and I'm like shaking like this because that's what happens whenever I get that deep into disagreement with anybody. I mean, usually, I just leave, but it was my room. I suppose maybe I should have left anyway, even though it was my room. So about 3 hours later, and it was after midnight. In fact, it was probably after 1 a.m. Aunt Alicia knocks on the door very softly. She comes in, and honey, she doesn't cook, so I know she didn't make those cookies. I know she must have gone out, bought the cookies, put them in the oven, brings them up on a warm plate. And I guess, thought we were going to make peace. And I found out some really shocking shit that I had never heard before. And the most shocking thing of all, she told me something that I can admire about my mother. So Aunt Alicia comes in with her fake plate of homemade cookies and says, "Do you remember Uncle Edward?" Uncle Edward, Uncle Edward, Uncle Edward. "I don't have an Uncle Edward." That's what I said. And she said, "Well, but that's what you called him. That was the last man that your mother dated." And I'm thinking, and my age of consciousness was kind of late. I think it was before kindergarten, or they probably wouldn't have let me go to kindergarten. They probably would have held me back. But apparently the last time my mother dated was when I was 4 years old. Well, I didn't remember Uncle Edward. "Well, tell me about Uncle Edward." And so she says that she tells me about the last time they saw Uncle Edward. She would just cut to the chase. And so the last time they saw Uncle Edward, he was running down the stairs. But my mother and Aunt Alicia were both downstairs, and I was upstairs in my room playing. And Uncle Edward apparently came from the direction of my room, running down the stairs with his pants practically falling off him, and he's clutching himself like this and screaming and yelling and saying, "You bitches! You bitches! You bitches!" and runs out of the house. Aunt Alicia and my mother they don't know what's going on because they've been downstairs. But they, of course, rushed to my room to see if I was okay. And apparently, I had blood on my mouth. And of course, they naturally freak out until my mother calmed down. And they, I'm sure I could just picture them. They were like holding me at all sorts of angles and directions and shooting a flashlight in my mouth to make sure it was okay, all the teeth were there, and there was no blood gushing out of my mouth, no blood gushing out of my nose and eyes and ears. And while they were doing this, I said something like, "He showed me this monster and I was scared and I bit it." I don't remember that happening. I didn't even remember it vividly described in all the color and authenticity that Aunt Alicia is able to apply to a story. And she finally said, "Well, that's not the end of the story." She said, "That was a special moment for the three of us as family." And so then she told me about the old man that lived next door to the house that Alicia and my mother grew up in. And this old man, long story short, no pun intended, was pulling out his monster starting about when they were, my mother claimed, because she could practically remember to the moment she was born, like Ray Bradbury. And she says that he started doing it as soon as they could walk because he was their sometime babysitter. My mother would just get mad and throw a tantrum when he did that to them. And eventually, Aunt Alicia just started refusing to go next door. My mother was the kind of person who was probably born with a plan. My mother, after Aunt Alicia got to the point where she refused to go anywhere near being alone in the house, either our house or the old man's house, my mother kept going and apparently kept letting him make her play with the monster until the right moment came. And she apparently bit him so hard. It involved stitches, jail time, and him moving away.